Welcome once again to The Lost Signals Discusses Games and Gaming Culture, a pretentious, philosophical, pedantic podcast where we focus on various aspects of video games as well as other issues and topics within gaming in general. Hello there, welcome back to Lost Signals Games and Gaming Culture. I'm wearing my glasses tonight because I am a very VIP exclusive, and I'm Scott Thurlow, of course, here with my fellow VIPs, Jonathan Ian Manzer.
I'm available on all consoles.
And Stephen Amosi.
I will only sit at this chair from now on.
Exclusively sitting there. And as you may have gathered, we're going to talk about exclusives, the practice of, and what we think about that from, I guess, mostly the consumer side, but we'll consider the industry side as well. But just, again, sort of a brief history of the practice of having exclusive games to various consoles. So, we're just talking about a precast that, sort of, if you think about it, sort of traces back almost to at least our original generation, like the NES/Sega, or even SNES into that, where, of course, like, the big ones, like Nintendo had Mario, Luigi, Link, all that. Like, they had their almost IP mascots, and Sega had Sonic, of course, and some other ones, like Tails as well later on. Mm-hmm. But, like, of course, if you wanted to play X game, you had to get the console, otherwise, fuck you, more or less. So if you were, like, lucky enough to be affluent enough to own them both, it wasn't a problem. We sort of discussed the console wars like season or two ago, but this is like about the games themselves and the practice of it. So I mean, it does have like I'll say a rich history. At least it goes back a while,
yeah, and
still to this day. But I think we'll get into it in a second. But my perception is that it's somewhat subsided in a sense. But with that, I'll open up to you guys.
Well, now that we're talking about it, there's a technology plays a huge part with this. Mm-hmm. So there was exclusivity before our generation with
that's true.
Like Atari versus PC, let's say. And there's no way that Atari could at all compete with the PC. And even the SNES, Sega, none of them could compete. As the consoles started to have the same technology within them. So like Sega versus SNES were very different game systems.
Sure.
N64,
and PS, maybe.
PlayStation.
PlayStation. Very different technologies and very different abilities to run different games.
Or Dreamcast, I guess.
Yeah. Well,
I almost forgot about that.
Yeah.
If anything, Dreamcast was mostly would be a competitor to the PS.
Right.
But
or maybe GameCube or something like that.
Well, it's like that's something that most people don't remember. They feel like they're in different ages, but like N64 and PlayStation came out relatively close to each other.
Yep.
Yeah. But they had different like the 64-bit versus
capabilities and so forth.
Like PS with CDs versus cartridges. So all those different like technologies allowed different games to be produced there. But now everything's kind of meeting together with PC, PS4, and Xbox One. And whatever else exists nowadays. Actually, but it still exists with the Wii.
Sure.
Switch.
That's a good point. Switch, yeah.
Like, you can't craft games to port very easily from that to...
That's a very good point. You're right.
So, again, I think as technologies merge, exclusivity becomes less of an issue.
Sort of more diluted, yeah. What do you think, Steve-O?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think to that point, I think Nintendo's always played the exclusivity game. And that's probably a large part of the reason why in those early console wars it was hard to port games, because Nintendo never wanted to make games that you could play on any other system, especially not when the Wii came around. And
sure, they've always maintained a stranglehold, like I said, on our mascots.
Super Nintendo and Genesis, like the Sega Genesis, were pretty close, but like they were still quite different. And now with the motion sensing stuff that Nintendo does, the other platforms keep trying to do it, but none of them have really done it all that successfully.
Kind of fell flat, sure.
I think that the only one that's really done it successfully is Nintendo, and I think a lot of that is because a lot of their games are aimed towards kids, so they have a double whammy for exclusivity there. Like, you know, Sony and Xbox are trying to, or PlayStation and Xbox are trying to cater to the like hardcore adult gamer crowd, and Nintendo is still trying to cater to their base from 1983, which is kind of kids, you know, like, and a lot of those games
largely,
are geared
but
towards
not
kids.
Not like all the way, but I agree. Like, see what you're
or
saying.
like nostalgia for kids games with the adults, like adults playing them.
Sure. No, so you mentioned something actually you guys both did. I want to bring up. So good segue here that because they were like they didn't want their games to release on their consoles because they basically had a lot of first party developers working for them. So it was like a lot. But on top of everything you said, it was even more difficult to have like one studio or one development team port it. They didn't want to do it anyways, but also they like Sony had their first party developers that made the obviously exclusive games for all the PSs, and Nintendo likewise. But now I think like with the rise of something like digital distribution and a lot more indie/third party developers have arisen since that generation, then it's a lot easier. Like it's harder for them to try to maintain like an exclusivity amongst their, at least sure they can maintain what they already have, but to start up a new IP and be like, okay, now it's only going to be an X, Y, or Z property, you can't get it. Like though that's still continued to say. I guess one of the big ones I was going to bring up was Halo. Like that was sort of the killer app for the first Xbox, and that's always been an exclusive property. Right. Gears of War is sort of similar to that as well. And like on the flip side, of course, you got like Uncharted, shit like that. But what I'm saying is like in general, the reason I think you're seeing it more diluted is in part at least due to the rise of other developers who are not beholden to any to any of the big companies who are already the console makers.
Well, exactly, and that's what I would say. When PlayStation first started out, the first PlayStation, when they developed the DualShock controller, it was the first controller with two joysticks. Yeah. I believe that was still when they developed that. I believe it was still a couple years before Xbox, the first Xbox.
I believe it was as well.
I might be
pretty
wrong,
sure that's accurate though.
But they made games that like kind of specifically did stuff for that because
like you was saying the technology
so that they could keep them exclusive. Like Ape Escape was one of the first ones that really utilized the DualShock controller, and it was like something that no other game system could do at that point. So I think there's something to be said for that. If you have hardware that only one thing can do, then yeah, it lends itself to exclusive games.
Certainly it's a selling point.
But between the PlayStation and the Xbox now, they can both pretty much do the same thing. You can map their controllers basically directly to one another. I don't know what... Honestly, I haven't played that much Xbox One yet, but I know that one of the cool things on the PlayStation controller that I haven't seen used to an extent that I would like to see is the touchpad on it. Yeah. I think there's a lot you could do with that, they use it for things every once in a while. A lot of times it just feels like kind of it's almost an afterthought.
A peripheral thing, yeah.
But some games use it like in really cool ways. I wish there was more of that, and I think that that's something that they could do in terms of exclusive games. If Sony was trying to develop games, the problem is like these developers don't really develop games anymore. Like the console makers don't really develop games anymore. It's all third.
Well, less of them, like I was saying. Yeah.
It's all third party stuff at this point. But yeah,
and also though it would the third party, especially if you want to be able to easily port it from console to console. It would go against to use exclusive technology. So again, I think it's less the developer of the consoles game and more of the third-party developer game now.
That's what I mean.
I agree.
For a third-party developer, they want to be able to put it on all the consoles they can. But if Sony was developing a game, they would want to use the PlayStation hardware to the greatest extent possible and the most specific extent possible so that, hey, you can only play this type of game on our system, and I wouldn't mind seeing more of that, but I'm kind of glad that exclusivity in terms of games is not as rampant as it used to be to another extent, because then you would see like a lot of cool games on Xbox that you'd never get on PlayStation. I don't have an Xbox, so...
Cuphead.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say Cuphead.
Got it on my list, sure.
It's like, I would love to play that game, but I don't have an Xbox. I'm not going to get it just for that game, although the price is coming down a little bit, so I might.
No, I get you. But I will build on that because, yes, it's more like, at this point, you could almost easily make, if not a direct two versions, one for Xbox, one for PlayStation, with like minimal hoop jumping, pretty much. As long as you know the hardware. Like, there's no reason that you can't make one for the other.
Two consoles, one Cuphead.
Yeah, awesome. Good one. Sure. But I was going to say, so going back to Nintendo kind of thing, where, for example, a couple of I'm going to speak about more Sony ones because I'm more familiar with them at this point. But like now they're just sort of banking on the recognizability of their IP. So for example, like sure, you could definitely have Uncharted on a Microsoft system, but Sony has now attached that property to be like synonymous with them, right? Same thing with like God of War. Like it's like Last of Us, like shit like that. And Microsoft has their own for sure. Like I said, Halo, Gears of War, Forza, also Crackdown, like stuff like that. But you're right. Like,
would any of you guys give a shit if any of those got ported over to Xbox?
No,
or the other way?
Not those ones specifically. I'm sure. Ask an Xbox owner who only has that and say, "Hey, would you like to play Uncharted?" They probably will say, "Yeah."
Yeah. If I could play, the newest, I don't know, what's a Microsoft exclusive, like Gears of War or whatever. Was that cross-platform the newest one?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I think it's still one of their IPs.
That'd be cool because I loved playing it when I had an Xbox 360. But
sure,
as a counterpoint though. I was probably going to get the PS4 anyway because I like PlayStation products. I've been brand loyal for a little bit.
Yeah,
but
same here.
What got me to purchase the PS4 was the Fallout games, and I believe that's exclusive to.
Were they? I'm pretty sure.
Was it
Fallout 4 was definitely cross-platform.
Oh no, you're right. Fallout 3 was cross-platform because I played it on my Xbox.
Yeah.
Well, I bought Fallout 4 because I bought the PS4 because of Fallout 4. I don't know if they could have gotten Microsoft, and that might have been the brand loyalty there. But like, I will buy now because I played God of War, the newest one. I would have purchased PS4 because of that game.
Yeah, that's sort of a killer app, like I was saying, for sure. Like, I think it was like, if I was in a hypothetical position where I didn't have PS4, it would be like one that would convince me and a lot of people as well, like to switch, or at least pick one up, and then you can have both. Of course, that's always going to be like possibly the best option. You don't have to choose. It's just that, I was brand loyal to Microsoft for a while, at least on last generation, and they did have some stuff that was like exclusive, but not a lot, not enough to like, make or break the deal. But I feel as if at this point, like we said, like everything that sort of evolved from that is there's not a lot left. Like I was going to bring up, there's a sort of a sub category of exclusives, which is like one of the dumbest things I think the industry has ever done. But it's called the timed exclusive, right? It's like, man, it comes out for X system over Y like a week or whatever it is earlier, but you can still get it. Like, who gives a fuck? Like, it'd be like, I guess it's good for like 10 years. Like, haha, I got it like a month before. You're like, okay.
Yeah, but I could see you.
When I was 10, I would have done that for sure. I just think like what's the point at that point, if you will? Like, what kind of like how does that help for the deal in general? It's just odd to me. But it's something
money.
they did.
It's
sure,
money.
It's few and far between, but it still happens. Like I said, there was more of it last generation, but here and there still.
Well, actually, then if we're going to go into specific things, there are like clothing sets or like armor sets you can get
skins and crap.
This console, but not this console.
No, you're right. All that aesthetic shit.
So I guess they're trying to find ways to make it work.
Maybe. I mean, that ties into like pre-order culture and all that shit, like which we'll probably cover as well. But it's just odd to me. Like, you're right, though. Like, hey, order for Xbox. Like, for example, Soul Calibur is a good example because for one console, you got to have one character. You got like Spawn and Link and whatever. I can't remember what the other ones were. But like, they were specific to each console. So if you want, I really like Link, but I didn't get to play as him because I didn't have the console that they put him in that Soul Calibur game, even though the game itself otherwise was cross-platform.
Right.
So yeah, man, like, and of course, I guess we'll just address this briefly because you've always got your PC, like, master gaming race where any game can come out for PC, but some of them still have been PC only. Like, there's no console release planned. It's just, so if you have a PC, you can play it. But it's always been the case because if your PC can run it, then it can run it. Like, there's no real difference, at least in terms, versus the difference between the two consoles, or three consoles, or whatever there may have been at any given time.
So what I think is interesting is that there are games that used to be PC exclusive, like the LucasArts games, are now coming out as
that's true as ports,
because now the consoles can run them.
Yeah, that's a good point, and like it's actually pretty sweet for sure. And like again, it ties into two things, one of which you hate, somewhat nostalgia, like I remember this game, but now I could just easily download it on my console if you want. I guess sure you could still do it PC, but also that like it allows people who haven't played them to get to them. So like I mean,
at some point I downloaded like Return to Monkey Island or whatever,
or like shit like that.
That was fun.
Sure. So
until I got really annoyed with it, the game is impossibly hard unless you cheat.
But yeah, man, like as I said, it's not that it's gone away altogether, but I feel as if you feel it less. Like it's hard to find like as you just said, a specific an exclusive that is going to entice you enough to switch, or like is touted enough. Like, oh yeah, this is a game changer. Like it's a console winner.
Yeah.
God of War.
Yes, God of War is that. I agree. Like I said, I tout any fans out there or audience who are listening who are Xbox loyal. Don't get me wrong, as one of you, God of War should be the game that convinces you to switch, or like I said, pick up both if the means are available to you.
Yeah, at this point, PlayStation's pretty cheap, so a lot cheaper than it was when it came out. So
yeah, for sure. It's just that again, I
might
switched.
be worth checking out.
I thought I'll address this quickly because you made me think of it just before that when they were announcing like when this generation was coming out and they were showing off like the specs and so forth of the X1 and the PS4, it's just like many of the outlets that I trust said like the hardware itself is better on PS4.
Well, it always has been, I think.
Actually, what's funny is what originally got me to shift to PS3 was the Blu-ray.
Okay, that's a good point too.
Blu-ray was a valid technology.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
When
Sure.
Blu-ray won out over HD.
HDD or whatever.
Everybody lost.
Kind of. But I mean, it's a funny point, but also valid because you're right. Like it was something to consider at the time that even though it's not directly related to games, it was something that was contained in each console, or like one had this format, one had the other, and depending, like Blu-ray was at least on the rise then, as you said. That's a funny point.
Yeah, well, that was the nice thing about PS. I mean, speaking of exclusives, I mean, this goes into movies and stuff, but like PS3, when it came out, it was like the best Blu-ray player on the market and way cheaper than other Blu-ray players.
Sure.
So it was worth it to get.
So it was convenient.
And, like, PlayStation, like Sony gave you that exclusive in terms of like just the use of their hardware, which was another selling point.
Yeah, in a sense. But no, you're right about that. So there was one other thing I sort of want to address. Us being consumers, like we're not developers, we're not the suits who are making decisions, but you tell me, exclusives, are they good for the consumer or not, and why, to what extent?
For the consumer, it's... So, I don't think they're necessary for the consumer except for the fact that if there was an exclusivity war going on in a real fashion, then like Sony and Microsoft would be competing
forced to
develop better
awesome
games.
titles. Yeah, true. That's a true
so
point.
That would be better for the consumer. But as it stands now, I don't really think there's particular need for it.
Is there a benefit at all?
Honestly, I think it's worse for the consumer because there's games that come out for Xbox that I would love to play.
Look at you, entitled gamer.
But, it's not... I don't know. I don't see it being better for the consumer. I don't necessarily see it... I mean, I guess whatever third-party... Because most of the people that do these games are, like, third-party developers, too. And, like...
To an extent, they have, like, contracts
They
with
just
Sony.
get a bunch of money from Sony or
That's what I'm saying.
Microsoft to just stay there, which I don't understand why... I mean, I guess I get why Sony and Microsoft, so they don't dilute their market in those, but, like... I wonder if it's really worth it. Like, I feel like that's probably a lot of the reason that it's exclusives are happening less and less now than they used to, on top of the reason that, there's more third-party developers now and they don't have quite as different hardware as they used to. But, I don't know. I don't think it's better for the consumer. I'll say that.
So, I'm going to make one last argument that Nintendo does prove where exclusivity can work. And they released less Wii's than they could produce in order to make it more
sort
exclusive.
of like a false exclusive thing,
well,
but
everything is a false exclusive in a way. But Nintendo,
but they rigged the game, if you will.
They do it nonstop.
Sure.
They do it with everything that they release.
they go full in with we're different than everybody else, and it works for them quite well.
That's true.
So
they have sort of perfected the art of like using that. And like I said, like because I have such a strong legacy, or at least a long one, and have a stranglehold and such a rabid fan base, largely that they can get away with it. And like at least they're still producing, in general, overall like quality titles. You mean like some of them they're jerking off, but some of them are work has been put into them to make them worth being exclusives. But I do like what you said. Like if indeed they only. I realize the way I phrased that question was also somewhat loaded. I'll answer before I address what you said. Yeah, I don't think there's much benefit to it it's more for the business side, and I don't have a lot of research or like information because, of course, they don't release a lot of it. Like their thought process in doing it, like what the contracts are like. Even like you said, Steve-O, probably Naughty Dog has some rich contract, with Sony that's like worth bank. Like, okay, it's not they're funding us enough that we'll remain exclusive because it works for us, and similar to whatever other ones, maybe like Bungie probably with Halo, or at least previously, but. Like, I do like the idea that if anything's going to positive come of it, if there was some sort of, like, quality, like, competitive bidding war, like, they're trying to one-up each other on, like, awesome exclusive titles, that would be good to at least the best scenario for the consumer,
right? If
we must have exclusives at all as a thing. But I do like what you said there about it.
Also, you theoretically have Sony and Microsoft doing quality control for what they're releasing, even on the
ostensibly
third-party aspects. So, what's the one that the Half-Life people have?
Oh, Valve. They have Steam.
Steam, which
is the shit show of shit. Yeah,
it's just like it's a free-for-all for anything. So perhaps this creates a benchmark,
forces them to like gatekeep it a bit. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point, too.
Steam is such a weird other thing.
That's possibly in play, yeah. Like, PC is like a Wild West.
That might be an interesting thing to talk about. So, Steam has its own, like, store that is just a clusterfuck. And, like, I don't understand why...
People have been saying that for years.
Like, Valve, it started off as such a good idea. And, like, Valve started off as, like, with these great ideas and these very strong games that were in there at first. And now it's, like, complete freaking mess. And, like, I don't understand why they don't just...
have a curator of some sort.
Yeah.
I mean, people have been saying that for years.
Well, yes. Valve also had a great idea with the Half-Life series.
Yeah, well, then they stopped doing it.
And they're like, whatever. I mean, like, that might be its own episode unto itself.
Granted, we got, like, 5 good games out of that, so I'm not complaining.
Sure, that they did port to consoles, like, eventually. But no, like, you're right, like, it has been known to be sort of a Wild West because of the way they do it. Like, you're right, it's a free-for-all. Anybody, whoever, like, again, like, shady hucksters can, like, jerk off a game and try to sell for, like, $5 or whatever, like, $10, whatever they're going to try to sell it for. And it could be just a jumbled mess of, like, an asset flip, essentially. Where you're right, like, at least the Microsoft, like, the big flagship boys, and even Nintendo, of course, is going to have provide some kind of quality control. Otherwise, the customers are a bit pissed.
They made a fucking walled garden, and then they didn't hire a gardener.
Like, I mean, that's really funny.
That's what I feel like.
So now all this shit's, like, growing out everywhere.
Exactly.
I mean, that's really funny. But I mean, like, I largely agree, of course, everything you guys said, because it's almost like we've been trained to accept exclusives, even like going back to our childhood, which is definitely true to an extent. Mm-hmm. But as the march of technology went on, as you guys said, it sort of got less and less an issue. And so now, like, there's probably few and far between of properties that are, like, still attached to the exclusive, like, moniker, if you will. But there's still some, so I'll just go through a bit and then we'll maybe wrap up it.
Sure.
But since, again, as I mentioned, I'm more familiar with the PS4, the Sony's lineup at this point. So things like Infamous, that franchise was exclusive. Killzone, if you guys remember that, which I quite liked. I mentioned Last of Us. Horizon Zero Dawn was an exclusive. Mm-hmm. So that was almost like a precursor to God of War, which is I also have on here. Bloodborne, I know you like that, Steve-O, a lot. You and your roommate Louie. That's an exclusive. Detroit Become Human was, which I forgot about, but then when I was doing my research, I'm like, oh yeah, it was. So like, so upcoming things, for example, as of the date of this recording, tomorrow, the day after this, Spider-Man drops, Marvel Spider-Man, which is a PS4 exclusive as well, which I also again forgot or didn't know about until I reminded myself when I was doing this.
This is no longer evergreen content.
Yes, and not quite. But when we were covering E3, you guys really liked the Ghost of Tsushima. It's going to be PS4 exclusive as well. So, and also Death Stranding, Kojima's new joint when it comes out, which I think it will, like 2029.
And if anybody wants to go back to our very first podcast,
yep,
The Order 1886 was a
that was the the controversy surrounding that game, but that game was in fact a PS4 exclusive.
Mind if I bring up 2 games?
Yeah, go ahead, hit me. So that's all I had.
Back in my young days in 1970, we
what?
No, it's 1990s, whatever it is. The Aladdin game came out for SNES and Sega. And that's the first game I remember. Probably not the first game, obviously, but
the one that sticks in your mind that had both or was on both.
From both that were similar. They were different in very great respects, and both great in their own ways. But
Yeah.
at least it was the games that attempted to have the same game on both consoles. But an actual example, what brought me into my brief stint in the PC Master Race was
What?
I had played Diablo 1 on the PlayStation 1.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah.
And I loved it. And then when I went to play, I heard Diablo 2 was coming out. I went to my GameStop in the mall to find
What
out
the hell is a mall? Go on.
to find out that they weren't porting it to console. So I upgraded my computer to be able to play that and got into whole
Wait,
PC
how'd you
gaming
play
for a
the
while.
first Diablo?
On PS1?
I don't remember it being on PS1.
It wasn't. They had streamlined the quest,
Okay.
so there wasn't as many of like.
They just cut out some content so it wasn't, so it doesn't eat up your memory, I guess. I don't remember that either. I do remember, like, that just for me personally, that was an era where I didn't actually own any consoles. I just bummed basically other people's. So, like, whatever they had is whatever I played.
Was that college?
Yeah, like early to mid college, I didn't own anything. So whatever anybody else brought to college, like at least in terms of the modern ones, I had my old shit, but at what was going on then?
Still
but,
rocking the Super Nintendo?
yeah, exactly. So that's a good point though. Like, so I guess if we close off, like if we wrap up a bit, that I'm not opposed to exclusives, but as you said, I don't think they're the best thing ever. But they sort of again have a rich history because it started out that way, at least for us and the generation that we grew up on, video game wise. So I do think it's probably good that because of the diverse rise of smaller third parties and so forth, and in being able to distribute your game a lot easier than having to be beholden to a bigger corporation who probably wanted it to be exclusive or would have liked it to be. We do see we're able to get a lot more than we probably would have otherwise if it wasn't the case.
But at what cost?
Yeah. Well, always at what cost, of course. That is the question we always must ask ourselves.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's an interesting phenomenon that I think could probably, for the most part, go away, especially between Sony and Microsoft at this point.
Yeah. But I do.
Nintendo's a whole different animal, which is fine. Like, I'm glad that they have their own space and they're making their own games. You know, at some point I'll probably get a Switch and I'll play that for those games, but I think that it's kind of silly that I can't buy Cuphead for a PlayStation. There's no reason.
Or insert whatever game here. But like again, I do understand the business angle of it. Of course, you want to keep a lock on the stuff that makes you money, but that just means like you're kind of screwing over your consumer base to an extent. Sure. But I think, like I said, there's lots of it, so I think that is a positive thing. So perhaps eventually someday it'll go away completely. Or, again, best case scenario, have to give credit to E on this one, there becomes like a huge, again, war on to create the best, awesomest exclusives, and that will produce some great art that might not otherwise have been produced because of the circumstances.
Or there'll be some kind of synchronicity.
Yeah, and they converge in some sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then we have a monopoly that controls all games. And,
no, you're right. I can't wait for that.
Perhaps.
Well, I mean, I think that was your argument the entire time.
Even the game Monopoly? Yeah. Stupid pun. Go on.
Perhaps.
Let's get passes.
Great pun. I don't have anything to follow it up with.
Not even barely a pun.
Any final thoughts on video game exclusives at this point?
No.
All right. Well, I will remain exclusive. Scott Thurlow, and I've been here with Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Good night.
And Stephen Amosi.
And I am a cross-platform podcaster for a price.
No, we're exclusive to you, of course. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Good night. Thank you for joining the Lost Signals Games and Gaming Culture. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows and more, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.